Good morning, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Good morning, members of the media. My name is Rambally. I am the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas West. This morning, it is my pleasure to welcome you to the opposition's Sunday press briefing on behalf of the political leader of the United National Congress and leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamala Persad-Bissessar, Senior Counsel, and of course my parliamentary colleagues both in the lower house and the upper house. I welcome you this morning, and in doing so we continue to bring the issues which affect you on a day-to-day basis to the forefront, in doing so to hold the government accountable, to hold all members of cabinet accountable, to hold entities within our communities accountable, ensuring that we have the highest levels of transparency so that in our democracy we can all thrive with a certain level of fairness and equity. This morning I am joined by Senator the Honorable Lyder, my colleague and close friend, and Senator Lyder has been holding true to what I have indicated has been the modus operandi of the opposition, the United National Congress. He has been, of course, attempting in every possible manner, in lawful manner, in the parliamentary, the truest traditions of parliamentary practice, he has been attempting to hold the government accountable. And one of the areas that he shadows is the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Trade, and other related matters. I know that he has been doing a phenomenal job inside the parliament, as well as on the political hustings where he has been holding government accountable. This morning I would like to hand over to Senator Lyder to first of all treat with some of the matters that are affecting us deeply in our pockets, and so he will bring to the forefront matters which I know we are seeking accountability and the highest levels of transparency from the Ministry of Finance, the Minister of Finance, and the government of the day. Senator Lyder, I hand over to you.
Thank you, MP Rambally, for that very warm introduction. And I say good morning to members of the media, as well as those listening in on the airwaves, social media this morning. And MP Rambally said it all. It is our duty as your loyal opposition to bring the burning issues to light and to hold this government accountable. And in my position as shadowing finance, trade, and other ministries, one of the burning issues that have been impacting the companies and manufacturing companies in this country has been this burning issue of VAT refunds that have been long outstanding from the government of Trinidad and Tobago to the many stakeholders, investors, and companies, manufacturing companies in this country, exporters. We would have seen in the newspaper late this week the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, coming out in the Guardian and in the Express. In fact, I have with me the articles which headlines a picture of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers President, Ms. Trisha Kusal, and it states in the Guardian, government must pay VAT refunds. Also, in the Express newspaper, we see the headline, TTMA calls on government to pay VAT refunds. And again, this has been a burning issue for the past 7.5 years under this PNM government regime. And especially under the last 3 years, I have been coming to the Senate, budget debate after budget debate, clamoring for the government to get in line with a timely repayment of VAT refunds to the stakeholders and businesses in this country. And in my presentation today, I will outline, among other things, how the Minister of Finance, Minister Imbut, has basically stonewalled the private sector in their attempts for full disclosure as to the amount of VAT, the total amount of VAT that is owing to companies in this country. VAT that does not belong to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And I will also be putting some very pointed questions on the conclusion of my presentation today to the Minister of Finance, Minister Imbut, and I hope that the media listening on will follow through with these questions to Minister Imbut, because I think there are thousands of people in this country, stakeholders, investors in this country, who want to know what is the true size of the hole that the government has put us in with regards to VAT refunds. And as I said, this week the TTMA renewed their calls to repay VAT refunds owed to manufacturers. And the TTMA head stated, and I quote, "It is becoming critical for the SMEs to receive their VAT payments." And whilst the TTMA pointed out to some $140 million being owed to manufacturers and SMEs, etc. in this country, I put it to the TTMA that this is indeed a very conservative number. This is, of course, restricted to the members of the TTMA. But we know that there are thousands of businesses in this country, many other exporters in this country. And we know that from previous debates that the number could amount to billions of dollars owing in VAT refunds to all stakeholders in this country. There are thousands of businesses in the economy. There are several sectors that would also be impacted other than the manufacturing sector in terms of non-energy. There are some sectors which are not limited to energy sector. We know that that is our greatest income earners to this country. Our biggest exporter from this country is the energy sector. So we know that there are hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions, owing to many of these companies. You see, ladies and gentlemen, the non-payment of VAT refunds for sectors serves as yet another stumbling block in attracting foreign direct investors into this country. We know under this government that there has been a literal exile of foreign direct investors. For in the last 7.5 years, more than $7 billion in foreign direct investment has exited our shores. So much so that any foreign investor coming into Trinidad now is celebrated with pomp and pageantry by this government. It is almost as though it is becoming extinct. Companies such as Lyder Brothers are shutting down, ArcelorMittal, among many others. Therefore, the nation is not aware, businessmen, businesswomen are not aware of the total amount of VAT outstanding to companies in this country. The Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association also went further to state, and I quote, "It is fundamentally important for the outstanding VAT refunds owed to the manufacturing sector to be prioritized as their cash flow is being significantly affected, and in order for the continued growth of the non-energy sector, having cash to facilitate transactions is imperative." So the question we have today, the first question we have to the government is, why is the government not prioritizing the repayment of VAT refunds to the manufacturing sector and to the broader private sector? The government comes to the Parliament budget debate after budget debate, claiming to want to support or being committed to supporting the TTMA's objective and mandate of doubling exports and manufacturing by 2025. Yet one of the greatest obstacles for them achieving this, withholding VAT refunds, withholding their liquidity, hampers their ability to achieve this. So why is the government not committing to supporting the TTMA in this regard? In our respectful view, the withholding of VAT refunds to basically, it artificially manufactures a surplus. That is the view of the United National Congress. We must recall that it is the Minister of Finance, Minister Colin Imbert, where he boasted about meeting revenue and expenditure targets via a tweet on the 1st of March this year, where he stated, and I want to quote what he stated in this tweet: "So far, we have managed to meet our revenue and expenditure targets for fiscal 2023, while those opposed to us pray every day that some calamity will befall Trinidad and Tobago. The latest malicious campaign is to try to convince the public that the economy is in trouble when the opposite is true." Well, MP Rambally, let me address those two statements. The opposition does not have to pray for some calamity to befall this country. The calamity already exists by this government being in office for the last 7.5 years and crashing our economy. So the only thing that we are praying for now is for a swift and fast election so that we can restore some level of decency to the way in which our economy is managed. And the second part of your question, where you say that the opposite is true about our economy being in trouble, this is in fact in contradiction to your Minister of Public Utilities, Minister Marvin Gonzalez. Well, I think MP Rambally, just last week, when Minister Gonzalez was responding to the Member of Parliament for Chaguanas East about the state of the economy, Minister Gonzalez was on record having to state that Trinidad and Tobago's economy is, he indicated that Trinidad and Tobago's economy is in as much trouble as every other economy in the world. So what is it? Is the economy in a good condition, or is the economy in a recession? Do you all discuss this in cabinet? Ladies and gentlemen, the Minister of Finance is boasting about meeting revenues and expenditure targets, but yet he's not paying these VAT refunds back to manufacturers. The government is holding what does not belong to them. Now, there's a word for holding what doesn't belong to you. It is not a complimentary word, MP Rambally. But I will not utter it here lest I steal the attention of the public away from the pertinent issues being discussed today. But I will state that this government and the finance minister shows their true colors when they can decide not to pay back VAT refunds and at the same time boast about achieving a fiscal balance. Now that is unethical by the least. And I will leave the references, legal references to my esteemed colleague who is a member of the bar and so on. But the reality is that the government is shamelessly withholding the monies of the private sector in the billions of dollars and then boasting of achieving a fiscal balance. And I put it to the population here today and to the Minister of Finance that if the debt to the private sector in the form of VAT refunds were to be honored by this government in totality, in full, Minister Imbert may have to be reporting a fiscal deficit today. Unfortunately, because the government has not disclosed the extent of the amount of VAT refunds owed, only the government knows that if it pays all of the VAT refunds, would this result in a fiscal deficit? This is a burning question. The government must come clean and tell the nation. And that is why I said at the very beginning of this presentation that Minister Imbert has literally stonewalled the private sector's attempt and the opposition's attempt of disclosure, full disclosure about the total of VAT refunds owed to stakeholders in this country. The trouble is that this is being done at a time when prices of hydrocarbons such as oil and gas are tumbling on the global markets. And should prices continue to fall, the government's cash position could become acute and compromised. This will result not in the broadening of our economic base by attracting foreign direct investments. This will not. The fall in energy prices and the failing of the government to assist the private sector locally will result in more borrowing by Minister Imbert, raising the public debt to GDP. It will result in this Minister Imbert and his government having to once again, as they have for the past 7.5 years, raid the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And this can also cause further delays to the repayment of VAT refunds to stakeholders in this country. In fact, deepen the hole that the government is already in. Now, this is not the United National Congress alone bringing this to the fore. We heard the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. But we've also heard a former Minister of Finance under the PNM government, Mr. Mariano Brown, speak at length about VAT refunds, the non-payment of VAT refunds, and the negative impact on the economy. Furthermore, we have heard the past president of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Gabriel Faria, speak at length of this. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, MP Rambally, being the MP for Chaguanas West, I think we've heard a past president of the Chaguanas Chamber of Commerce speak at length about the issue of VAT refunds and the impact on businesses. And I know that rumor has it that he may soon join the cabinet. So I wonder what his position may be at this stage, MP, whether he feels strongly about this matter, and what does he intend to do to contribute towards alleviating this problem, especially on behalf of the Chaguanas Chamber.
Yes.
Furthermore, accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers on this issue made it clear that the government's delay in paying VAT refunds amounts to a cost of doing business. You see, when you take out liquidity from companies, many companies have to borrow to bolster their liquidity. Borrowing comes at a cost. So this is an added cost to the cost of manufacturing. Takes away from their profits and their ability to expand their operations. When we visited the TTMA's website in the past, and in various consultations I have had with former presidents of the TTMA, there were various solutions that were posted to try to assist with this problem. Solutions that I agree with. I want to state a few of them for the record. Maybe Minister Imbert will be so kind as to listen to this for maybe the 5th time. The first solution was the removal of VAT on inputs to the manufacturing process. You see, many of these manufacturers, when they are importing their raw materials, have to pay VAT at the port. This, of course, takes away from their liquidity. When they manufacture the products and sell it on the domestic market, they're able to get back this VAT that they've paid at the port. However, when they export to the international market, these manufacturers cannot charge VAT on the international market. So this is one of the contributors to VAT being owed from the government to manufacturers. So the suggestion made by the TTMA and by other stakeholders is that you remove the payment of VAT at the port to accredited and approved manufacturers in this country, so that when they produce the end product and sell it on the domestic market, the VAT will be paid in full to the government, and that when they sell to the international market, there will be no need for a claim. This will alleviate the problem. Another possible solution is the creation of a separate account for the collection of VAT expenditure, so that VAT funds are not muddled in the consolidated fund. The third solution is expedite refunds for exporters. You see, if the TTMA is attempting to double manufacturing by 2025, their exports and exports, sorry, the exports will increase. And therefore, the amount of VAT refunds owing from the government to the manufacturers will also increase. And as such, what is happening here is that the government is literally penalizing manufacturers for expanding their operations and increasing export in this country. They are literally putting a roadblock in the way. So they're penalizing them for this level of growth. And a fourth solution would be the establishment of a VAT net-off system, which I'll speak about shortly. But in light of this government's tardiness to pay VAT refunds on time, it is necessary that the government responds to the private sector regarding these proposed solutions. These four policy items would protect the private sector from a government that is derelict in their duty to pay what is due and rightfully due to stakeholders in this country. And it goes further than this. On September the 27th, 2022, the day after the Minister of Finance read the budget, none other than our most respected businessman in this country, Mr. Arthur Lockjack, complained bitterly about the VAT refunds owed to companies. The article was headlined, and I quote, "Lockjack slams government's slow VAT refund payouts." Mr. Lockjack, a senior respected businessman, a former president of the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, stated, and I quote, "We are paying VAT and we need to get those refunds back because basically we cost our export prices without VAT, but we pay the VAT." Lockjack said this was a tremendous blow on the cash flow of manufacturers. And I quote him again, "I think in my group alone, the government has over tens of millions of dollars in VAT refunds, long time outstanding." That's one group, MP Rambally, amongst thousands of manufacturers in this country. And speaking on the fiscal measures in the budget targeted to manufacturers, Lockjack stated, and I quote, "You cannot incentivize us to get into export and penalize us with VAT." This is what I was saying previously. This is Arthur Lockjack. And I'm sure the sentiments are the same across the entire industry. Then again, AmCham chimed in about VAT refunds as well. Last year in my budget presentation, I referenced the potential solution that AmCham recommended by a net back or net off. So instead of paying VAT to impact their cash flow. So these entities I have listed here today are calling for solutions from the government. They are clamoring. And the bottom line is that the government must pay back VAT refunds on a timely basis. It is inevitable that you are hurting the private sector liquidity, especially the small and micro enterprises in this country who are struggling to survive, and preventing them from expanding their operations to respond to an end of the lockdowns that was brought on by this government administration. And in the end, it appears that this government is using these VAT refunds almost as an interest-free loan from the stakeholders of this country. They are not even paying the interest due by law, MP Rambally, to those companies in this country who are waiting sometimes years to get their VAT refunds back. If you are late as a private sector company in paying your VAT, you have a monthly fee penalty to pay, some 2%. And by law, the government is obligated to paying 1% back to the private sector for outstanding VAT refunds after a period of time. I think it's 6 months. And every month thereafter. So I asked Minister Imbert, how much has the government of Trinidad and Tobago paid back to manufacturers in this country in terms of penalties? I put it to you that zero. Because many of these manufacturers may be afraid to challenge the government lest they face victimization. A UNC government, when returned to office, will immediately deal with this backlog of VAT refunds. And we commit to ensuring that we put the mechanisms in place to ensure we do not put the government of Trinidad and Tobago back in this hole. We will work with stakeholders, with their suggestions, but we have to wait for that day to come. I must reiterate, as I stated in my response, in my budget response, that if this government cannot fix three main things, then not much good for the domestic business environment will happen. Let me remind the citizens of this country what these three things are. If you cannot fix the ease of doing business in this country, we all know the pains of having to deal with approvals from TNTech and WASA, trying to get financing from banks, dealing with the port, and many, many other issues these continue to become burdens, and it's worsening over the months and years ahead. Every businessman in this country can attest to this. So if you don't fix the ease of business, if you cannot find the VAT refunds to pay back to manufacturers in this country, and if you cannot ensure an equitable distribution of foreign exchange to all stakeholders, all businesses, especially the SMEs, if this government cannot fix these three problems, then any other proposal in their budget will fall barren, will mean nothing. These are the three critical areas. So now I turn to the media, and I turn to Minister Imbert to pose some questions. I'm asking Mr. Imbert here today, come clean with the nation. Be transparent with the people in this country. Be transparent with the private sector. My first question is, what is the true and total value of VAT refunds outstanding? How many billions are being owed? Is it 3 billion? Is it 7 billion? Come clean. This is not your money. Tell the stakeholders how much is outstanding. Secondly, when does the government and your Ministry of Finance intend to pay all of these outstanding amounts, all, and bring the government current with stakeholders in this country? What time frame does the government need? You see, because in this country we need to know. Stakeholders deserve to know. Let me remind you that it's not your money to hold, to keep, to use as an interest-free loan. You are riding the balance sheets of the private sector to artificially reduce reported government debt position. I'm stating it here. Furthermore, businesses need to know so that they can start planning for their growth. They need to have the confidence of investing in this country. So we don't have more than $7 billion in foreign direct investment exit our shores. Foreign companies need the assurance that they will get their VAT refunds back. And the private sector needs to know that they can comfortably invest in expanding their operations, in increasing exports, and not be penalized. My third question to Minister Imbert is, what mechanism will this government put in place to improve the time frame in the repayment of VAT refunds and assure businesses in this country and foreign direct investors that this problem will be solved permanently, so that they can restore confidence in the private sector? Let us know if you're going to be incorporating some of the suggestions of the TTMA, if you so say that you're going to support them to achieve their goal of doubling exports by 2025. Because if we come up to date with VAT refunds, because we have to understand, even if you come up to date with VAT refunds, every single day, more and more VAT refunds are becoming due. So you can't just solve the problem by paying all the VAT. You have to put mechanisms in place to ensure a proper repayment of VAT refunds to stakeholders in this country. And the fourth question, this is my final question to the media. It has come to our attention that a chosen few businesses in this country who are aligned to this current PNM administration, who are financiers of this PNM political party, a few of the big boys, just a few, a chosen few, are getting their VAT refunds expedited. Tongues are wagging around Port of Spain. I cast no aspersions, but we are hearing this. Getting their VAT refunds, whilst the majority of stakeholders, SMEs in this country, continue to wait sometime years to get their VAT refunds back. We are hearing names being called, and I'm asking the Minister of Finance if he knows anything about this. Tell us, if you do, tell us who they are and why are they being treated differently. And while you're at it, tell us why these same businesses are getting preferential treatment with access to foreign exchange in this country. Let us know if you know anything about this. Tell us who the businesses are and why they're getting preferential treatment. Because it appears, MP Rambally, that the only way you can survive in this economy, the only way you can grow and thrive, is if you can rub shoulders. Not hold a PNM party card, because many of them PNM party card holders are suffering. But if you rub shoulders with senior government officials, that's the only way to make it in this country. So I basically end by saying that if this government does not deal with these matters outlined here, if you do not pay your VAT refunds to companies in this country on a timely basis, if you do not fix the ease of doing business in this country, if you do not ensure that there's equitable access to foreign exchange to all stakeholders in this country, we will continue to see this economy spiraling downwards as it has been doing for the past 7.5 years before the COVID pandemic and even after the COVID pandemic by this PNM government. We will continue to see more companies closing, more than the 6,000 SMEs that closed post-COVID. We'll continue to see more than 60,000 jobs lost under this administration. We will continue to see this economy plunge into a recession, and we will continue to see this nation's poverty rate increase and worsen. So, members of the media, I put these very serious questions to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. I hope that following this press conference, that you immediately call Minister Imbert and find out whether he can respond to this. But I put Minister Imbert on notice that we will be bringing these questions to Parliament. We will be calling on the government to account for this on behalf of manufacturers, on behalf of the private sector, on behalf of all the hard-working, heavily invested stakeholders of this country. I thank you, and I now hand you over to MP Rambally, who will be discussing some other serious matters affecting the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, its citizens and stakeholders. MP Rambally.
Thank you, Senator the Honorable Damian Lyder, for that very insightful, comprehensive, meticulous presentation. And I know the major plank of his presentation was really the manufacturing sector. But that issue of VAT refunds, it affects the SMEs in a very huge, in a very big way. It is very impactful. So I am very happy. I want to thank Senator Lyder for bringing that type of information. And this is something that you will see from my colleagues, my parliamentary colleagues in the opposition in the United National Congress. When statements are made, when questions are called and put to the government and we seek answers, if they are always grounded in something which is factual, something of substance, and it is unlike the government that just throws red herrings and deflects. We come with our facts, and it is because we seek the highest level of transparency, which is what I started off with this morning, Senator Lyder. Yeah. So I want to thank you for that presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to move quickly along. There has been a particular matter which has dominated the public domain during at least the last week. It is not a matter which is new to the country. It does not involve issues new to the country, but it is a matter which has been raised, and I want to say in somewhat unfortunate manner, by none other than Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. And as I get into my presentation, I want to say that I want the population, our brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, our nation of Trinidad and Tobago is dying a slow and painful death. A slow and painful death. It is dying due to the dysfunction and maleficence of this Rowley-led government. I want you all to keep that in the forefront, not in the back of your minds, in the forefront of your minds. And the perfect example of this dysfunction and maleficence, Senator Lyder, it can be seen by the Prime Minister's so-called press conference, which he held last Thursday, that post-CAB conference. Ladies and gentlemen, the Prime Minister's statement last Thursday about the crisis facing the criminal justice system embodies everything this Rowley-led government is about. Dr. Rowley's statement was shameful, it was delusional, it was filled with lies, it was a blatant insult to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Last Thursday, Dr. Rowley addressed the media and told the nation that the attack on the DPP's office is not real, that it was somehow completely invented by the Guardian newspaper and the UNC. That, ladies and gentlemen, Senator Lyder, that members of the media, that is completely insane. I want to ask Dr. Rowley this morning, if there was no attack on the DPP by himself and members of his government, why did 16 attorneys at law in the DPP's office write a joint letter demanding an apology for the statements made by his government? This morning, I want to tell Dr. Rowley, if you, Dr. Rowley, truly believe that this crisis involving the office of the DPP and the entire criminal justice system is a figment of everyone's imagination apart from yours, then you, Dr. Rowley, you need to see a psychiatrist because you are not mentally well. This is a very serious matter. Senator Lyder, I want to remind the nation of some facts, spelled F-A-C-T-S. Let us look at the track record of Keith Rowley over the past 7 years. Rowley's first act as Prime Minister was to get an acting president to unlawfully oust a sitting central bank governor, namely Jawala Rambaran. And why? Why did he do this? Because Mr. Jawala Rambaran was exposing the inequality in the forex distribution system. Today, thanks to Dr. Keith Rowley, the independence of the central bank has been destroyed and Trinidad and Tobago is experiencing a full-blown forex crisis. In 2021, Dr. Keith Rowley intercepted something that this country will never forget. For many reasons, it will never forget the fact that in 2021, Dr. Keith Rowley, as Prime Minister, intercepted the Police Service Commission's merit list at the President's house, causing the entire Police Service Commission to collapse. And why? We ask again, why? Because he did not want Gary Griffith to be reappointed, who was the then substantive Commissioner of Police. He did not want Gary Griffith to be reappointed as Commissioner of Police. Look at the lengths at which Prime Minister Rowley would be prepared to go and to interfere with independent institutions in this country. Rowley's dictatorial actions decapitated the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, leaving it leaderless, leaving it rudderless for well over a year. And in 2022, Trinidad and Tobago, do you know what happened? It recorded its highest murder toll ever in the history of our country. 600 plus murders. This, ladies and gentlemen, is all thanks to Dr. Keith Rowley's assault on the independence of the Police Service Commission. You would recall yet again I'm going with the more recent matters which are in the public domain, and you can do an easy Google search and you will find the documentation to justify these things factually. You would recall, following the Privy Council decision in the case involving John Henry Smith and others, that the Privy Council found that there was a strong appearance of an overzealous, we all know the Privy Council writes, their words, their language is always pregnant with meaning. They found that there was a strong appearance of an overzealous P&M Attorney General interfering in criminal prosecutions. And the factual matrix for all of this was Piaco 1. Ladies and gentlemen, this caused, and I should say, this whole matter as a result of that Privy Council decision and their rationale, their reasoning, it was left with no choice but to quash those criminal proceedings. In law, we say that the indictment was quashed. So those criminal proceedings were effectively brought to an end because of the strong issue of bias. There was interference, a strong appearance of an overzealous P&M Attorney General seeking to interfere with a judicial officer. And we have to ask the questions, why? So they quashed that indictment. They brought to an end those criminal proceedings. But the Privy Council said that it would fall upon the DPP to determine whether to relay the charges, whether to bring the charges afresh. Do you know, following that Privy Council's ruling, although DPP Gaspard publicly advised that the question as to whether to reinstitute the criminal proceedings was under his consideration, under his active consideration, the Keith Rowley's government attempted to pervert the course of justice by promulgating an unsolicited opinion, encouraging the charges to be relayed. So you have a situation, the Privy Council say, on account of the P&M Attorney General, there's a strong issue of bias, and therefore they say that we have no choice but to quash the indictment. Criminal proceedings come to an end. The Privy Council say, but this is now within the remit of the DPP. And everybody knows in the Commonwealth, the DPP enjoys an independent remit, independent from any political, bias, any political prejudice. So the DPP will determine whether the charges are to be laid afresh, having regard to the evidence, etc., that exists at the point in time. And when that is said, the DPP comes out publicly, DPP Gaspard, and says that it is the question as to whether to relay those charges, to lay that indictment afresh, is within his active consideration. You then have a P&M Attorney General or Minister in the Attorney General's office coming out and promoting an unsolicited opinion as to whether the charges should be relayed. Now, if that is not perverting or subverting, attempting to subvert the course of justice, you tell me what really is. So, does Keith Rowley believe the Privy Council is in league with the Guardian newspaper and the UNC to frame him? Ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, I give just these three examples at this point in time. But it more than shows that Keith Rowley has no respect for the rule of law. He has no respect for the principles of democracy and the sacredness of our independent institutions. Sorry. So not only does Dr. Keith Rowley have no problem in undermining Senator Lyder, undermining the independent institutions, he also has no qualms about persecuting political opponents. And this is what I want to go to immediately, because it brings us to the most vile and heinous scandal in the history of our independent nation. And I refer to none other than the Vincent Nelson Indemnity Gate scandal. It was the Dr. Keith Rowley's government, his government, that got caught providing an illegal indemnity to Vincent Nelson so that Vincent Nelson could turn state witness against political opponents Anand Ramlogan and Gerald Ramdeen. This indemnity agreement was drawn with the sole intent to circumvent the office of the DPP, which has, according to law, the lawful authority to enter into plea bargaining arrangements. So if the DPP was of the view that Vincent Nelson was somehow potentially in a position to provide useful information, useful evidence, which could be used to go after other persons who are, accomplices or the primary perpetrators of, criminal actions, the DPP under law is the one who can engage in those plea bargaining arrangements. And that is where he would engage with this person and say, well, okay, and they would then barter and say, well, okay, you plead guilty and this is what we will take into account, and they will go to the court. That did not happen in this case, In this particular case, what we saw from the newspaper information, and the media did a hell of a job in bringing forward the facts concerning that indemnity scandal. We saw that it was none other than Dr. Rowley-led cabinet that went after Vincent Nelson, sought to induce him to come and become a state witness, and they did it by means of an illegal indemnity agreement, totally circumventing the DPP. Up to today, ladies and gentlemen, Keith Rowley denies he's the author as the head of the cabinet and or instigator of this unlawful indemnity agreement. And then he wants to come in a post-cabinet briefing and claim that he has no knowledge of any of these things. He wants to claim now that he never said anything about Ram Logan and Ramdean and had nothing to say about particular cases. Last Thursday, ladies and gentlemen, when Keith Rowley asked how could anyone think he could possibly want to interfere with the office of the DPP, well, I want to say today, the reason is simple. The people of Trinidad and Tobago are judging you, Dr. Keith Rowley, by your character and by your actions. And the people of this country, they do not trust you and your lying government. They have no faith in you. I want to talk a little bit about the plea by the lawyers in the office of the DPP, because I think it would be remiss of me and the members of the opposition if we did not touch on this. You see, I will come to another matter which is occupying today's Express, and I want to talk about it. And what it shows is it shows a level of insult, a level of where they are totally mismanaging, insulting, and then trying to ex post facto place the blame on public servants. And I will get into that in a little more detail. But let me deal with the plea by the lawyers in the office of the DPP. I want to take some time now to remind Dr. Keith Rowley of the plight of the hard-working and underappreciated attorneys at law working in the office of the DPP. Without them, the wheels of the criminal justice system will not turn. These are the persons who have to look at the evidence, they have to give advice on the particular matters, sometimes render opinions to the DPP himself, and in other cases they have to give advice to the police officers, and they have to go to the court and present in a manner which is in keeping with the highest democratic principles, present the evidence in a way that if there is evidence that will secure a safe conviction of criminals having perpetrated crimes upon the citizenry, that they will ensure that that is done. It is a very difficult task that is cast upon them. And as attorneys at law, they are trained to do so, but that does not diminish the role and the function and the task at hand, the tremendous task at hand that they have to fulfill. So it is important that the nation understands the tremendous pressure and difficult working conditions they must endure. And I want to stress this is because it is the attorneys who, stress Damian Lyder, it is the attorneys who do the work, not the building in which they are housed in. So concrete and glass, Prime Minister Rowley, don't help prosecute criminals. The human beings who are the officers within the DPP's office, they are the ones who are doing the work. They are human beings, and you cannot disrespect them in this flippant and just casual, out of hand manner. It is noteworthy that Dr. Rowley chose to attack the DPP on a PNM political platform, and this is something that leaves a lot to be desired from the head of the cabinet the head of the government. And the question is asked, why? Why would you do that? And the only reason that the Prime Minister would want to do that, go on a political platform and engage in that tone and language which he did week before Thursday, it is because he wanted to demonize the DPP in the political guile in full glare of the public. That is why Dr. Keith Rowley did that. So this is what 16 attorneys at law wrote after Rowley's government attacked the DPP, accusing him of underperforming. Imagine Keith Rowley, who has spent the past 7 years playing golf, whose only record accomplishment in office is getting COVID 4 times, is telling the DPP that he's not performing. Here is what those lawyers in the DPP office, Senator Lyder, had to say after being attacked. This, and it was reported in the Trinidad News, and I want to quote: "We, the state attorneys of the DPP, formally express our disappointment with these comments. They do not accurately reflect the efforts and commitment of the staff at this office. These statements present a distorted view of the existing reality and are likely to undermine public confidence in this office." Ladies and gentlemen, when you undermine public confidence in the office of the DPP and the officers within that department, you undermine the confidence which people have in the criminal justice system. The Newsday reported, and I quote again, "The attorneys said with limited staff and an increased workload, they have been performing and are committed to their jobs despite having to sacrifice personal and family time. They said this affected them not only mentally but physically as well, and some have fallen ill because of the workload. They urged the AG, and I quote again, 'We call upon you to issue a public apology to the office of the DPP and retraction of these unfounded claims.'" So rather than last week Thursday post-cabinet press conference that the Prime Minister issued an apology to the office of the DPP for what he had done, he tried to pretend he had not in fact attacked the DPP. And instead of letting the reporters who had gathered there have a go at the Attorney General to ask him whether or not he would be issuing an apology, and if not, why not, you hid your Attorney General as you have been hiding him for the past year in office. Blunder, mistake after mistake. Amor continues to be protected by the Prime Minister. Pray tell, what is it that Amor came in to replace Al-Rawi that he's being protected to this extent? So here we are, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm going to get to this article in a little while, Sunday Express article, front page headline. So before I do so, here we are in Trinidad and Tobago, where we recorded 600 plus murders last year, and on track to record more this year. And instead of having a plan to deal with violent crime, Dr. Keith Rowley and his government is busy attacking and undermining the overworked and underpaid staff at the DPP's office. During Rowley's madman rant in Barataria, he lambasted the DPP and the special branch for not occupying a building due to the special branch making certain safety recommendations to the building. Do you know, Rowley mocked the idea that the special branch asked for bulletproof glass for that DPP's office. Well, this is the same special branch that guards Dr. Keith Rowley and his family. So when it comes to guarding, is it that when it comes to guarding Dr. Keith Rowley and his family, special branch is good? But when it comes to special branch guarding and protecting the lawyers, the attorneys at law in the DPP's office, working on criminal matters and facing threats to themselves and their families, the special branch is suddenly being unreasonable in their work and in their recommendations? I want to say that, as I end off with Dr. Keith Rowley for now, I want to say Dr. Rowley, as a Prime Minister, he has a blemished track record of consistently attacking and undermining independent constitutional offices. Keith Rowley has severely undermined the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. He has subverted or attempted to subvert the course of justice via the Nelson Indemnity Gate. He has destroyed the confidence in the administration of justice. Now he has his sights on the office of the DPP and DPP Gaspard. Ladies and gentlemen, I do not make these statements lightly. Dictatorships rarely occur because men with guns overthrow a democracy. Rather, dictatorship occurs through a gradual erosion of democratic norms and values. The gradual and sustained assault on our independent institutions by Dr. Keith Rowley and the PNM is leading us down a road to the eventual erosion of all of our democratic checks and balances in our society. If Rowley is allowed to continue with his dictatorial assaults, the citizens can find their freedoms all subject to the whims and fancy of Keith Rowley. Yesterday, Rowley went after political opponents. Today, he is going after an independent office holder, DPP Gaspard. Tomorrow, he will be coming after you. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the sad story that we are treating with, the sad reality that we are facing in Trinidad and Tobago. So as I end with Dr. Keith Christopher Rowley for now, I want to turn very quickly. In our cabinet, Senator Lyder, you have two main persons. Without these two persons, the cabinet does not exist in law. It is the Prime Minister and it is the Attorney General. Having dealt with the Prime Minister, and in light of what I'm seeing in articles today, this is the Sunday Express front headline. I want to turn now to the Office of the Attorney General, and particularly the Attorney General, Reginald Amo. Sunday Express, 20 million scandal. Help me, Anand. This is the headline. And I was shocked when I saw this headline early this morning. And when I read the article, I was shocked to see that what we have is a situation where this is the inside page, right? It is a fairly lengthy article, and so it does not permit me to go into it into detail. But I urge citizens to become familiar with these matters, because when you are not properly informed, you give room for the Rowley smear campaign. So when the leader of the opposition, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, talks about a smear campaign aimed at members of the opposition, she is very right in what she's saying, and I will tell you why. But first of all, I ask you, please follow these things with some level of detail. It says here John, and John is Stanley John, who was appointed lead investigator. So, ladies and gentlemen, very quickly, you recall that there was a judgment that was delivered by the High Court which ordered that some $20 million be paid to former accused persons in that murder trial, the Vindra Naipal Kuhlman murder trial. And these persons, having now brought proceedings, we call it malicious prosecution proceedings in the civil courts, it went and it engaged the courts, and having engaged the High Court determined that some $20 million was now to be paid out as damages to these former accused persons. So that having been done, then it turns out when it became a topic of discussion, none other than Dr. Rowley as Prime Minister said, well, he's awaiting a report from his Attorney General. Attorney General comes into the country some 1 or 2 days after this became a public issue and engaged in the public domain, and he said that, look, as Attorney General, I will not advise myself, and I am going to set up this committee, and this committee is going to investigate, and it is a case of a missing file. Mind you, he's saying it was a missing file 2 days after he said that. 1 or 2 days after he said that there was a missing file, the file mysteriously appeared in the office, and so the AG's office. I want to say that what I want to recall, and it is here in the newspapers, I will quickly say, Amo's statements and some of what he said that an explanation is demanded for the 20 million outrage that has been visited on the citizens of this country. This is Amo. I will not permit myself at this stage, as a result of due process, to utter what I think has occurred in this case, but it is sinister. So Amo, off the cuff, coming in, saying that he's not advising himself, he says that it is sinister. Then one of the other things that he said, which is amazing, and I want the population to recall, I haven't said that the file was displaced. I said the file disappeared. I am very careful about the language that I use. The file disappeared. I might go as far as to say, subject to the investigation, that it was caused to be disappeared. So having said it sinister, he then says that I don't want to say the file disappeared. I didn't say it was misplaced, I said it disappeared. And I also want to go so far as to say it was caused to be disappeared. So this is ammo. And then one of the other things is that I also understand the outrage. I also understand the outrage has to do with this particular incident. I also understand your irony, your outrage, and that of the public, that people seem to get a blind, a free pass in our country, in my circumstances, where they should be held accountable. This is Reginald Amo, Attorney General, saying this. And then what do we read in all of these, in this article today in the Express? And when we read the substance of the article, what it points to is a backpedaling by the Attorney General. Do you know that the lead investigator, Stanley John, is now asking the attorneys who appeared for the defendants to provide information to them? When you all will recall that when the matter first arose, Minister Stuart Young, who was the then acting AG, went there and said, I call and I get the registrar and I get this and I get that, and look at the file, and he rests on a big hefty voluminous parcel of documents. And he said, look, this is what the documents are, and what have you, and what have you. Look where we are now. There is a judgment existing for $20 million, some $20 million in damages to be paid to these former murder accused persons. You went on a wild goose chase. You said it was sinister. You said that you went so far as to say it was not misplaced. It disappeared or was caused to disappear. And look where this whole thing reached now. It reached where Stanley John, as the lead investigator, has to now turn to the attorneys on the other side to find out. Can you imagine? They want to seek information from the attorneys on the other side, the defense attorneys. In this case, sorry, not defense, the claimant's attorneys who brought the action, to tell you what happened inside the AG's office. Can you imagine the ludicrous, the nonsensical, what I would say, the rubbished position that is being adopted by the Attorney General and with respect to this committee investigating this matter? They are backpedaling, having run and hid and attempted to deflect what was the state of affairs in the AG's office, namely that you were bypassing, you were treating the staff, the lawyers there, as you are seeking to do in the DPP's office. You are seeking to bypass the public servants. You don't want to engage them. You are not spending any time. When former attorney generals indicated on the record that they had a system in place where they would meet with the Solicitor General, that they would meet with the lawyers and talk about the matters that would likely create big exposure for the state and taxpayer dollars. They would meet and talk to them, determine whether the matter has to be, referred outside, whether external counsel has to be briefed, whether senior counsel has to be briefed. This was a procedure that was in place, but under the PNM, they dismantled those systems. And your own ineptitude, your own lack of diligence, your own incompetence, when it comes to the forefront, you want to say that the file was not misplaced, it disappeared. Now the committee, realizing they don't have any information to suggest that kind of rubbish, they want to ask the claimant's lawyers to now provide information. What information do you need? The lawyers in the AG office, in the Solicitor General and the Chief State Solicitor, they have their files. How else were they going to the court? And this is what they can't wrap their heads around, How else were these lawyers going to the court and making submissions? It is there in the public domain that in the judgment, you had a situation, it was told that the lawyers made an offer of $1.2 million in damages to each former accused person. How could they do that? It defies logic to suggest that they were able to make those offers without getting the approval of the Attorney General. You tell me in this country, in this day and age, this is the rubbish that the government is allowed to peddle for the public and expect the public to believe this? So I want to say today that if I want anything to be taken away, ladies and gentlemen, the lawyers, and I don't want this to be spun any other way. You know, the PNM have a way, this PNM Rowley-led government have a way that every lawyer in the country is a UNC lawyer. Well, we will accept that, because lawyers who are worth their mettle and who are worth some salt and who have some intelligence and who have integrity, they will be prepared and they will be rushing forward to associate themselves with the UNC, because this is a rule of law party. So we have no problems with that. But the PNM has a way they want to say UNC lawyers, UNC lawyers. Let me tell you something. The lawyers in the matter, they have not refused to give information. What they have said is that if we are providing you with information, remember they also have a duty of confidentiality to their own clients, you know. Their own clients, they have a duty of confidentiality, so they will have to call in their clients. They will have to sit with their clients. They will have to say, look, we have a request being made of us in this particular matter, and we want to advise you and to take your instructions as to whether or not to disclose matters that we hold on file for you. That file does not belong to anybody. That file where they have records of what they did in the matter involving their clients, it belongs to the attorneys at law, and it is subject to a duty of confidentiality that they continue to hold, notwithstanding that the matter is completed in court. They continue to hold to their clients. So I want to know, I want it to be clear that they are not refusing. When I read this article, they are not refusing to give the information. They have indicated that if they are to give the information, they want assurances that the report will be provided to them. And that is only the basic principles of natural justice. The government had to learn it the hard way in that matter involving Gary Griffith, where he had to go and stop them from putting out a report when they did not give the man a right to be heard. In this particular case, if it is they are providing information, they would like to see the report, and that is only fair. So I leave that there, but in the public's interest, this is what I want to call upon the government, and I want to call upon Stanley, John, Ralston, Nelson, whoever it is. I want to call upon them. I want them to give the firm undertaking and commitment that the report into that matter as to what they claim to be involving a disappeared file, I want them to give the commitment that they will make that report public. Forthwith upon its completion, that they will make that report public. Nothing less will do for the justice of the citizenry. And I want to say that in laying the report, we also want to know what fees are being paid. What fees are being paid to Ralston Nelson or Stanley John or whoever is involved in this matter? What fees are being paid to them to carry out this investigation and to bring this report? Because they are being paid. They are being paid. And the public, in those circumstances, furthermore, they're entitled to get a copy of that report. So I'm not only calling for the report if it is the undertaking is given to the lawyers on record, that if they give the information, the report will be provided for them. I am calling in the interest of every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago that that report, forthwith upon its delivery, that it must be laid in the public domain. Make it public. Make it public. And I want to know, if that is not so, and you don't want to give that commitment, that undertaking and that firm commitment, pray tell Attorney General, pray tell Dr. Keith Rowley, pray tell this PNM government, why are you trying to keep this report secret? Why? And you know, it brings us to another matter, you know, and I will just say this very quickly before we go to questions, Senator Lyder. It brings me to another matter, that where you have, and I saw that the media has also carried another matter, and it is important. In the realm of the AG's office, you have an Attorney General who caused the taxpayers of Trinidad and Tobago, by his error, by his, and according to him, his, it's not misplaced this time, his misrepresentation that he made on an affidavit in the Miami proceedings, causing the lawyers who the state had retained to be disqualified. He himself cannot participate in the proceedings, and we had to go and file an appeal. Well, they filed the appeal, they lost the appeal, all of those costs, and you would recall I had asked that question in the parliament, whether he would be fit in those costs, whether he would be fit in the bill. In law we call it costs thrown away, or wasted costs. So whether the Attorney General be fit in that bill. So having caused taxpayers to pay unnecessary monies for that appeal which they lost in the Miami proceedings, because he himself lied on oath. The next question I want to ask is, this is another matter where we are seeing we have to pay out 20 million, which according to them at the basic level, the lowest denominator, it is because of the incompetence of Amor Al-Rawi and the Attorney General's office, and I mean the higher echelons of the AG's office, not the Solicitor General and the Chief State Solicitors. And going further than that, you all will recall a matter of Civil Appeal 2016-03172, Arjun Haripal versus Deposit Insurance Corporation. You all will recall that particular matter, where again the state is likely to have to pay monies, taxpayer dollars, owing to the fact that they missed their deadlines to file witness statements. AG Amor is in that case, representing Deposit Insurance Corporation. So I would want to ask the question, in as much as we are asking for accountability concerning fees and wasted costs, given that AG Amor missed the deadline for filing witness statements in that Arjun Haripal and Deposit Insurance Corporation case, does he intend to indemnify, in other words, reimburse the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago for the damages and the legal costs in that matter? I don't know what it is yet. We will get the information, but it has been reported in the press, and I would like to know if he's going to indemnify. We have asked already whether he would indemnify the Miami wasted costs. We have heard nothing from him. And I would like to know, how much money were you, meaning AG Amor and his legal team, paid in legal fees in this same Arjun Haripal case when they were representing the Deposit Insurance Corporation? And are they all going to refund their legal fees to the Deposit Insurance Corporation? You were paid. Are you all going to reimburse your fees as well back to the coffers of the state? So ladies and gentlemen, if I go on much more, there's much more to say, but we have limited time. And so I wanted to bring these matters to the forefront. If I may just summarize quickly with Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. Dr. Rowley, and I want to say commendations and applause, sorry, and full kudos to the Republic citizenry of Trinidad and Tobago, because it is because of you and it is because of the media that you all have held him accountable, that having gone on the political guile and barataria and seeking to incriminate and somehow, harass and intimidate, attempt to intimidate and insult the DPP's office, an independent institution, he had to backtrack. So one Thursday he insults, and last Thursday he had to come back and say, no, I didn't attack. That's a figment of all imagination. That is all Lyder and Rambally and Kamla and whatever else UNC. And then, well, because our media was brave enough to say that no, Dr. Rowley, hold on, we need some answers on these issues. You say no, that article was factually incorrect. It was premised factually incorrect. I want to say kudos to the media, because I will tell you why. When that press conference was ended, when he ended his substantive presentation in that press conference, post-cabinet press conference, he called for the Guardian media to issue a public apology. And the reporter, I believe, and whosoever the reporter was, I want to say kudos to them, because he started off by saying, Dr. Rowley, I have no apologies for you, but I do have some questions for you. And you are right. The Fourth Estate, media houses, media personnel, radio, TV, print, social, otherwise, hold this government accountable. Do not fear them. Don't let Rowley bully you all. You all need to hold them accountable. Ask why it is he is hiding his Attorney General. Why is it they are not coming out in postcard briefings? Why are they not accounting to the people? So this is something that I want to say kudos to the citizenry and to the media, because that is what led to Dr. Rowley having to retract on his position and attempt to deflect and blame other persons on last Thursday concerning his initial onslaught on the DPP's office. And I also want to summarize the position with AG Amo. AG Amo, you have a lot of explaining to do. You have proven, you yourself have a local and an international track record where you have proven yourself to be the most incompetent Attorney General in the shortest possible tenure that an Attorney General can have in Trinidad and Tobago. So you have a lot of explaining to do. I think at this point in time, Senator Lyder, maybe we can go to asking the media if they have any questions.
We have some questions, MP. Senator Lyder, you mentioned the outstanding VAT refunds. Do you know what the value of these refunds are collectively?
Well, you listened to MP Rambally's presentation today, and you see that many things are veiled in secrecy under this government. This is one in particular that also seems to be veiled in secrecy. We have been attempting to get this figure, and remember, this figure changes on a daily basis. It goes up, it goes down. The government comes to boast about repayment of certain values of VAT refunds in previous budget statements, but yet they fail to disclose the exact amount. We are hearing unofficially that it could be in the billions, as much as 7 billion. We cannot say with certainty. But what I can say is that we will be bringing questions to the Parliament to ask Minister Imble to come clean to this nation and tell this nation exactly how many hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars is currently owed. So the answer to that is no. This government keeps it veiled in secrecy.
You also alleged that the government is paying VAT refunds to a selected few. Can you give us some more details on that, or maybe tell us about the legality of that, if that is indeed the case?
Remember that we cannot cast aspersions upon people by just hearsay and what is being spoken around town. You know, business people in the city speak quite openly to each other in places where they get together. And tongues wag around the city. So we hear the words of this happening. We hear of certain business people getting more access to foreign exchange. But I would not come out on media to call any name, lest I be sued for defamation of character. But in the fullness of time, this too will be disclosed to the population.
MP Rambally, regarding the issue surrounding DPP, we've heard from the Prime Minister, but we haven't heard from Mr. Gaspard as yet. Do you think he should make a statement, or do you expect him to continue to remain silent?
I want to reiterate in response to that question of the media, I want to reiterate the call of Mrs. Prasad Bisesa, where you have critical institutions involved in this, I have to say, a government inflicted or government attempt to attack an independent institution. That independent institution has to stand its ground, and part of standing its ground, it must speak out. You see, they are all part and parcel of the administration of justice, and we already have a waning confidence in the administration of justice. So I think, yes, Mr. Gaspard, DPP Gaspard, is duty bound as a key figure, as a major propeller in the wheels of the administration of justice, particularly criminal justice system. He is duty bound to speak on the matters which have engaged the public domain, and he has to refute and at least give his version of the events which have been unleashed upon him and his office. He must also be fair to the persons who staff his office. Those junior officers, they have been essentially called lazy, underperforming, waste of time. You all are not doing your jobs. So he has a duty to them as well. If he expects them to continue working with the kind of fervor and the capacity which they have been doing, he needs to protect them. And one way of doing that is of course coming out and refuting what has been unleashed against his junior members. So if I may say that I cannot tell the DPP what to do, but certainly he has a duty to respond in these circumstances. And I think, if I recall correctly, I saw eminent senior counsel Martin Daly suggesting that in his commentary today. I hope I'm not misquoting him, but I seem to recall he was making the point that there are questions to be answered, and it would be helpful, of course, to have the DPP answer. And I am saying the common denominator in all of the rationale is that if you are a key player, and all of this is really to build confidence in the administration of justice, the DPP certainly has to say something.
The Prime Minister also made mention of the fact last Thursday that the opposition continues to not want to support the whistleblower legislation.
Well, this is something that I hope the media gives proper space for this. Dr. Rowley and his cabinet and his government, they came to the parliament and they said that they were bringing the whistleblower legislation. On the morning of the debate, if I remember correctly, it was February of 2022, 4th of February. They said that they were going to debate the bill, and on the morning, remember, we were experiencing some parliamentary restrictions in terms of speaking time. And on that morning, they unilaterally moved this motion. I say unilaterally because they did not really consult with us on that. And they got up on the floor and they moved this request that they wanted to increase the speaking time for the Prime Minister to pilot that proposed whistleblower bill. So he got additional time. Dr. Rowley proceeded in his additional time with that, accumulated time to talk about corruption and allegations of corruption and what have you, and so a lot of it did not make any sense. So what did we do? Dr. Munilal, in responding to him, simply said that if it is you are talking about corruption, in principle, we have no objection as the opposition in combating corruption. We want to see effective legislation to combat corruption. But how can you talk about combating corruption, bring in whistleblower legislation, but you have not yet fully fully implemented procurement legislation? So you cannot talk like that and bring another piece of paper on the law books, and the paper is not worth the print. So what you have was a situation where we put it squarely. Put your money where your mouth is and bring the fully implement procurement legislation, and then we will take it in strides. And in addition to that, I think there were at least 9 speakers for the opposition, and we all pointed out the flaws in this bill. So we are left to wonder, why is it that bill was brought in the first place? And the only thing we could think of was that they intended to pass another piece of paper law, which really they would not implement in any meaningful manner. So you would have already have a situation of where procurement legislation, one of the major planks in combating corruption, public corruption and otherwise, that it is not fully implemented. You're coming to pass another piece of paper law which is not worth the paper it is written on, and will not also be properly implemented, if at all. And therefore what you're doing is you're fooling the population that you're fulfilling your executive/legislative role as a government when you are failing in that regard. So these are matters which we put squarely to the Prime Minister. As a matter of fact, when that whistleblower legislation was debated, it got to the stage of where Dr. Rowley was winding up. He was winding up the debate, and they moved to adjourn the House. So it wasn't a case of where we were not supporting it, We pointed out the flaws, and naturally it has to go through different stages. It did not even get to committee stage. It went and it was debated. He was winding up, and they, as the government, moved to adjourn the House. That was in February 2022. They did not make any attempts whatsoever. Dr. Rowley, you are a stranger to the truth when you spoke last week concerning the whistleblower legislation. You did not make any movements, did not take any steps to say, well, okay, we will bring back that bill now, whether it was later in the month of February, whether March, whether April, whether May, whether June, whether July, before the close of parliamentary session last year, 2022. So he did not see the need to bring it back. And he was at the stage of winding up, you know. So I want to ask Dr. Rowley, why when you were at the stage of winding up, that you moved to adjourn it, and you never brought it back to the House so that you could close off your winding up and put the matter to go to committee stage and have the eventual vote on it. So don't put the blame on the opposition. You were doing it for political expediency. You were doing it as an attempt to tell the population that you're serious about combating corruption when you are not, and you did not have a response when we asked why are you not fully implementing the procurement legislation. You still do not have a response to that. So that is my position on that whole facade about whistleblower legislation, and that the opposition is not prepared to support it.
Senator Lyder, the Prime Minister has said this week that he does not think that the fallout of Credit Suisse will have much of an impact on Trinidad and Tobago. Do you have an opinion?
Well, I don't have a direct opinion on that, except to say that any fallout with any company, any foreign direct investor in this country, any local investor in this country, any of that contributes towards a decline in our economy, a decline in business, a decline in foreign exchange coming into our country.
No.
I mean, one only has to look at today's papers. If we look at today's papers and we look at the Trinidad and Tobago Stock Exchange trading summary, look at the headline. LJ Williams declines by 6.23%. That's one company, but it's a significant company, a legacy company in this country, well respected, and we see a decline. And if you read into the report, you see that it states here, the indices ended the week in mixed territory. The composite index decreased by 0.59%. The All Trinidad and Tobago index ended down by 0.33%. The cross-listed index fell by 1.4%. And last week there were 4 shares advancing, but 16 shares declining. This is an indication of the state of our economy. Every single company adds value to our economy. Any fallout with any company is a continued contribution towards the downward spiral. So the Prime Minister may try to trivialize certain things. He may try to trivialize certain things. And that's what they are accustomed doing. Trivializing matters. Trivializing percentages. Oh, when we listen to the RIC speak about only a 3 point something percent that rates impact the cost of goods with manufacturers, they trivialize it. What is 3.5 or 3.6% of the cost of a commodity on the international market when we're competing against China, when we're competing against India, when we're competing against Colombia and so forth? And I say the government because as far as I'm concerned, I've been to the RIC consultations, I've been following the RIC consultations, and it's my humble opinion, along with many others in the party and in the population, that this RIC is an actual farce. It's a total farce. I cast no aspersions, but it is a feeling that the RIC is doing the government's bidding. That these consultations will go nowhere, that the government will once again, without taking any recommendations from stakeholders like the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association and other business entities and chambers of commerce, without taking the advice of the Supermarket Association, without listening to the cries of the population, of citizens in this country, they will go ahead and raise the rates of electricity. And furthermore, we saw this week Marvin Gonzalez come out openly to the media and state that the RIC will be conducting an assessment on WASA. So water rates about to increase. So the Prime Minister is either a stranger to the truth or spent too much time on the golf course, that he doesn't understand what's happening in the business community. It's right here in the papers. We are seeing the impact. Any company or foreign direct investor in this country, domestic company in this country, anyone that goes out of business, like the 6,000, or that leaves our shores, and that has a falling out with us, takes their business elsewhere. Any company that does that, there's a bottom line, there is an impact on our country. We're already losing things by the grab. Look at the state of the dry dock facilities. The only dry dock facility we had in Trinidad and Tobago that was that the government took over. The asset that was owned by CLICO that the government took over. A few years later, a government-run entity, due to mismanagement, crashed that dry dock into the ground. Experts say that it cannot be salvaged. And what does that mean for Trinidad and Tobago? It means that large ships from Suriname, Guyana, ships that we have, large ships we have here, but Suriname and Guyana that bought foreign exchange into this country, we've lost that business. And we have vast unemployment as a result. Welders, mechanics, persons involved in restoration of ships, all of them now are out of jobs.
Well, with Senator Lyder's permission, if that particular media house, I just want to make this point. Coincidentally, the Credit Suisse response of that Dr. Rowley gave was prompted by questions we asked on Friday. I just want the population to know, because I know some people may think that this is something that is beyond them as a layperson.
Yeah.
But it's a very simple matter. You have a global banking sector of which we are part. Banking, Senator Lyder will tell you and has alluded to it today, it is about confidence. Credit Suisse, which we as Trinidad and Tobago and the PNM government in particular, they have affiliated a lot of our bonds and whatever we do with respect to portfolio and investment and stuff, they have linked it with the Credit Suisse Bank. That nothing is wrong with that, The Credit Suisse Bank is the 45th, it is ranked as the 45th largest bank in the world. What has happened, however, with Credit Suisse is that it has been subjected to a lot of, I don't say a lot of scandal, but there has been a lot of questionable practices which have been raised in the international banking sector, and they have, called on Credit Suisse to account, and different things have been happening which caused the Credit Suisse shares to drop in its value. So what would have happened is when they detected that, the not UBS, the Swiss credit bank, Swiss credit bank would have injected over $68 million US just last week. They would have injected that so that the shares could hold its value. Credit Suisse bank shares. What happened thereafter? It did not work. And by last weekend, what would have happened is that their shareholding value would have plunged by some 18%. It immediately caused the Swiss Central Bank to become involved and other international banks, because they did not want to have a crisis in the global banking sector. So what did they do? They started to get involved, and that is where UBS, being a bigger bank than the Credit Suisse Bank, they basically said, well, okay, and there was agreement that the UBS would now acquire Credit Suisse Bank. And that is what happened. UBS share, 22.48 shares of Credit Suisse will now be the equivalent of one UBS share. That is the value. When you look at when it is the UBS is purchasing the Credit Suisse Bank. I say all of this simply to say that whilst they have brokered that deal and UBS is now acquiring Credit Suisse Bank, Prime Minister Rowley is on record as saying that our exposure is minimal. But one has to be on guard, because at the end of the day, whilst there's an acquisition taking place, we all know that acquisitions it doesn't happen overnight. You have to share financials, you have to share a lot of confidential information, there are a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy that has to take its course, and therefore it is expected to be completed by the end of 2023. So there is a move. It has somehow that move of UBS being a bigger bank acquiring Credit Suisse Bank, it has injected some kind of confidence, and the shareholding of Credit Suisse is now at a particular level, satisfactory level now. What has happened is that being said, only mere days ago, you then had the US Justice Department issuing subpoenas for officials of both UBS and Credit Suisse. And whilst one may say, well, it has to do with evading US sanctions, and it was a matter of if they are found guilty of evading the US sanctions, what it would mean is that these entities will be guilty in having facilitated Russian oligarchs. That is what it boils down to. What does that mean for Trinidad and Tobago? We do not know. But it means that we are on thin ice. And all of that, I say to give people a background, Senator Lyder, is to say that one would have expected that given that Trinidad and Tobago investors through our domestic banks, insurers, pension funds, and mutual funds, that they may have direct and indirect investments with Credit Suisse Bank. Why has Dr. Rowley and his government not called upon the central bank? Right? Why have you not called upon the central bank governor, who is the one statutorily responsible for regulation and supervision of financial entities, to issue a prompt statement providing details on how local investors will be impacted from this UBS fallout and Credit Suisse? And that is what we call mitigating the financial, the contagion effect. So this is where we really want to get the government to be accountable. It's not just a matter of whether you are of the opinion that we have minimal exposure. You might hold that opinion. It might be an informed one. But if you're talking about investment, as Senator Lyder has said, you have to talk about confidence. And this is where the central bank governor, I would have thought that the government would have called on the central bank governor, not mandate him, call upon him, because he's even statutorily responsible. And therefore, he should have been saying something about this whole affair with UBS and Credit Suisse. So that is what I think, at the end of the day, one would expect that if we want to have investment confidence and keep the confidence of our local investors as well, that we would call upon the central bank governor to say something. He is responsible for regulation and supervision of financial entities.
Yeah, just a last question to Ida. The opposition leader has come out this morning and said that the opposition is supporting the idea of repatriating Trinidad nationals in Syrian refugee camps, and that the opposition will intend to set up a working group to process this. Do you have any comment?
Well, I don't, Senator Lyder, I don't want to preempt any further statements to be made by Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar as leader and the working group. So I don't want to say anything that would preempt what they have to say, and also prejudice any actions that they may wish to take, the steps they would want to engage in this very sensitive matter. What I would say, however, is that a discussion needs to take place. There is a growing awareness, not only locally, but internationally. For myself, I could say that I met the Human Rights Watch, that is an international group based out of New York. I would have met with them recently, simply because, being involved in human rights issues as an attorney at law. But having met with them, having met with some of the local Islamic groups who are seeking to repatriate some of their relatives and friends, etc., etc., it seems to me that, and I support Mrs. Prasad-Bissessar, because it seems to me that at the end of the day, we have to have an awareness of the situation. Internationally, what you have is that states would have declared ISIS as being strictly involved in terrorist activities. You would have had certain territories deemed ISIS territories, and therefore persons going there, you would question why they were going there and what are they doing, etc. And that is all fine. Trinidad and Tobago, and I want to make it clear, the United National Congress, nobody in the opposition is of the view that we should support terrorist activities. Nobody is intent on bringing back anybody who is involved in terrorist activities. That is not what this discussion is about. The discussion is bigger than some, this government and whosoever whether it be AG Amor, Minister Hines, Minister Faris Al-Rawi, promoting any kind of notion of Islamophobia. That is not what this discussion is about. We have to be fair to our own citizens. And what happened internationally was that you saw that having declared in the peak period of the ISIS attacks, terrorist zones, terrorist activities, foreign terrorist fighters, in 2014, it was the Kamla Prasad Bisesa government that would have acceded to the UN resolution 2178. And all that means is that they joined the global community in countering extreme violence. They call it countering violent extremity, CVE. So that is what would have happened. And so the Kamla Prasad Bisesa regime is on record as countering terrorism. But what happened between 2014 and now was that you would have seen that having eliminated a substantial part of the ISIS territories and those who engage in ISIS activities, the UN then started to declare that the risk was no longer what it was before. And therefore they started to soften, not Trinidad and Tobago, not the UNC, the United Nations. It started to soften its approach to how it treated with persons who had gone across to some of these terrorist zones. And therefore you saw that the United Nations was now promoting repatriation. And in fact, Canada is one of the countries that has taken the call and they are repatriating. I think Norway is one, and other countries are repatriating. I think some of our regional islands as well, they have been doing that. Our neighbors have been doing that. It may not be the numbers may not be as big as Trinidad and Tobago, but this is where the conversation has to be held. This is where it has to take place, because if internationally there is a softened approach to treating with persons, particularly the wives, the women, and the children of those persons who may have engaged in terrorist activities, and there's a softer approach now, you have to be on guard for what they call sleeper cells. So nobody is saying to pretend that it doesn't exist. We are certainly not saying that. But there are sleeper cells, and so there are United Nations counter-terrorism resolutions which are in place, which treat with these things already. What a country has to do, a member state has to do as Trinidad and Tobago, it must now pass the requisite domestic legislation that is appropriate to the needs now that exist, to the risk that exists. So you can't always take the position that and tell a whole population it's too much of a threat to national security. If that is in fact so, well then you have to say so. But I don't know that that holds any longer as a broad brush statement when almost all other countries are repatriating their citizens from these ISIS territories. So I give that long preamble to say that you cannot treat, one thing with laws, Senator Lyder and ladies and gentlemen, laws must be in pursuit of a legitimate aim if it is constitutional, and it must be proportionate. So I have no doubt it is legitimate to have some of the legislation that we do have in place for countering terrorism activity, but if it remains on the books, it must also be applied proportionately. If it is you no longer have a risk, you must adjust the proportionality of how you treat with these persons. And this is where the conversation has to be had, and this is where we have to look at whether or not you have children, 72 children from our information, ranging from ages 4 years old to age 16. So you cannot broad brush that category. Are you telling us that a 4-year-old coming back to Trinidad and Tobago is going to pose a national security risk? It may be that if the child has to come back with the parent who has been there, that is where you have to focus. And this is where the United Nations and even the international organization, Human Rights Watch Group and other organizations, they are prepared that if any country does not have the requisite resources to reintegrate persons in the society, this is where they are prepared to assist. And so the question is, if even this government is saying that they don't have the resources, that they, in addition to the concerns that they have, if they don't have resources, well then this is where you have to say, well, okay, what exactly are you lacking, and can we source it from the UN or any of these groups? And of course, at all times, you are not seeking, we are not by any means, by any stretch of the imagination, to be taken as though we are saying that anybody who is a terrorist must come back to Trinidad and Tobago. That is not what this discussion is about. That is something totally different. And this is where we are saying that persons who have committed war crimes and other crimes, they have to be held accountable over there. And even if they have to come here and face the law, let them face the law as well. So this is where the discussion has to go. I don't wish to prolong this, but I want to say in closing on that issue, it cannot be that you can have persons, and persons have been deported and come back to Trinidad, and we don't have any known policy, any announced policy by the government of how they're treating with them. And look at this. This is the Guardian, stateless after ISIS. And at first blush, people may be saying, well, no, you choose to go and fight or whatever. These people who are coming here, they didn't choose to go and fight. And some of them, they have to be taken on a case-by-case basis. But here it is, you have a boy, 8 years old, unable to attend school. And I don't think by any standard, whether it be an international human rights standard, whether it be by our own constitution here locally, our standards, to have a child growing up without education. And then we want to know why this crime is so high in the country and it is spiraling out of control.
We see that happening with the Venezuelan children in Trinidad, right here in Trinidad.
Yes. So I hope that I have indicated what the position is, that it is a discussion that has to be held, and we need to have it, and we need to be proportionate in how we treat with it. And so, yes, I say it as general as that, so that the working committee, I am not in any way preempting any of their statements that they will wish to make and any steps they wish to employ.
Those are all the questions we have.
So I want to thank persons very quickly on behalf of Senator Lyder and myself. I wish to thank you, the listening audience, the viewing audience. I wish to thank members of the media. As we part ways, I want to say that there are a lot of activities taking place now. I will start with Senator Lyder. The fact that we have SEA exams this week. Parents, we just want to appeal to you. We want to congratulate you and commend you for the efforts that you would have given in terms of, preparing your children. These are the final hours. So we wish you all the best, and to all the children who will be writing SEA this week, I believe it is Wednesday, the 29th, we wish you all success in your exams. I leave it at that, and I know because teachers and elders will be providing the requisite advice as to what you have to do in these final hours. But on behalf of the opposition, we wish these young children all the best in your SEA exams. And I move on now to the fact that we have several religious festivals or several religious celebrations or observances at this point in time, spanning throughout the Hindu community, the Christian community, the Muslim community, and also we are about to embark upon the Shouter Baptist, Spiritual Shouter Baptist Liberation Day. So let me just hand over quickly to Senator Lyder to bring greetings to all the communities.
Well, I just want to state firstly that United National Congress, being a national party, a diverse party, as you can see, we are made up of many creeds, races, and religions within the United National Congress. But as your government in waiting, we speak to the entire country. We speak to all citizens, whether you are supporters of UNC, the PNM, or you're apolitical. We just want to wish all of these religions going through, for example, as a Roman Catholic, we are in a period of Lent as we approach the holy time of Easter. We also, right now, my brother next to me, the Hindu religion, going through Navaratri at this point in time, and our Muslim brothers and sisters who are in the moment of Ramadan at this time. We know on Thursday coming is Shouter Baptist Day. We know how significant the United National Congress played in making this day possible. Under, I think it was then Basdio Pandey, the then Prime Minister Basdio Pandey, that created this day. So we just want to wish all of you, all citizens in this country, whatever religion you may belong to, and whatever holy period you're experiencing at this time and observing at this time, we wish you a very happy and holy season, and we look forward to continuing to support this nation, support all religions in this country, all creeds and races in this country, as your next government in waiting. So all the best to you during this holy period.
Thank you very much.
Politics, Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. Oh, good. Small pin, you're lucky. Marvin Gonzalez, you're lucky. I had a whole segment for you, Marvin Gonzalez, the minister, man. Nobody are water. You're lying and attacking people. You escaped too. Rohan Sinanan, you escaped. Oh, Lord Fitzgerald, Ethelbert Hines, you escaped this Sunday. Because this Sunday, Rowley by the whole show. Douglas Politics, an hour and a half response to the nonsense, the lies, the obfuscation, the disgusting arrogance of Rowley. Rowley, log on, boys. Get your popcorn ready. It's all about you, Rowley, the worst prime minister in the history of Trinidad and Tobago. Douglas Politics, 7:30 p.m. Log on early. Don't miss a note.